They said we were too chaotic, too emotional, too unpredictable for their perfect order, so they cast us out, locked our world behind bureaucratic walls, and left us to fade into silence. But they forgot one thing. Humans don't wither in the dark. We evolve, we endure. And when the stars turned their backs on us, we built a light they couldn't ignore. This is the story of how isolation didn't destroy Earth. It awakened something the galaxy never saw coming. The verdict of isolation. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her hands against the observation window of humanity's first diplomatic vessel, the Unity. Before her stretched the most magnificent structure she had ever seen. Celestial Station rotated slowly in the void, its crystalline spires catching starlight from a dozen different suns. Each section housed representatives from hundreds of worlds, and today, humanity would finally take its place among the stars. Elena had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. She spoke 17 alien languages, understood the cultural nuances of dozens of species, and had memorized every diplomatic protocol the Galactic Council had provided. Her heart raced with excitement as their ship approached the docking bay. Captain Marcus Chen floated beside her, his expression more cautious. As the commander of Earth's first interstellar diplomatic mission, he had learned to expect complications. Something about the Council's invitation had felt rushed, almost urgent. They had been given only 6 months to prepare for this meeting, far less time than other species typically received. The docking procedure took hours. Celestial Station was so vast that their ship seemed like a tiny seed landing on a mountain. When they finally passed through the airlock, Elena gasped at the sight before her. The Grand Assembly Chamber was a massive sphere with delegates arranged in perfect concentric circles. Each species occupied a specific position, and Elena noticed immediately that the arrangement wasn't random. At the center sat Supreme Coordinator Zethkalar of the Nexaran Empire. The being was imposing, standing nearly 4 meters tall with skin that shifted colors like oil on water. When Zethkalar spoke, the words came from a translation device that somehow made the alien's voice echo in perfect English. "Representatives of Earth," Zethkalar began. "You appear before the Galactic Council to receive judgment on your species' future role in galactic civilization." Elena blinked in confusion. "Judgment? I apologize, Supreme Coordinator, but we understood this to be a diplomatic meeting to establish peaceful relations and cultural exchange." A sound that might have been laughter rippled through the assembled delegates. Elena noticed that the laughter came only from the inner circles, while the outer rings of delegates remained silent, their heads bowed. "Peaceful relations," repeated Zethkalar, all 4 of the aliens' eyes focusing on Elena with unsettling intensity. "Your species has developed faster than light travel in merely 37 years after achieving nuclear fusion. You have reverse-engineered 3 different alien technologies within months of first contact. You have established trade agreements with 17 independent species without council oversight." Captain Chen stepped forward, his military training keeping his voice steady. "Supreme Coordinator, we have acted in good faith in all our dealings. We have shared our technologies freely and have helped mediate disputes between neighboring species. We followed every guideline your advanced scouts provided." "That," said a delegate from the second ring, "is precisely the problem." The speaker appeared to be from the Veltar Collective, a species resembling large silver-furred primates. "Humans are unpredictable. They question established hierarchies. They treat all species as equals regardless of their designated classification. They encourage others to exceed their assigned limitations." Elena felt her confusion growing into something closer to anger. "You're saying we're being judged for being too helpful? Too willing to treat others as friends rather than subordinates?" "You do not understand the cosmic order," Zethkalar replied, rising from the ornate throne. "For 12,000 years, galactic civilization has remained stable because every species understands their proper role. The advanced guide and protect. The developing serve and learn. The primitive remain in their designated spheres. Order is maintained through structure. And humans," added another delegate from a water-filled sphere, "represent chaos. In the mere 30 years since you achieved interstellar capability, 43 different species have begun questioning their assigned positions in our carefully balanced society." Captain Chen's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, though he knew it would be useless here. "Assigned positions? You mean you've been controlling these species?" "Guiding," Zethkalar corrected firmly. "Each species is assigned a role that matches their natural capabilities and maintains galactic harmony. Some are builders, some are thinkers, some are laborers. This system has prevented wars and chaos for millennia. Elena looked around the chamber with new understanding. The arrangement wasn't based on diplomatic protocol or arrival order. It was a hierarchy of power and control. The species in the outer rings looked smaller, more subdued, constantly seeking approval from those above them. "You've enslaved them," she whispered. "We have brought order," Zethkalar's voice thundered through the chamber, "and humanity threatens that order. Therefore, the Council has reached a unanimous decision." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the Sol system in perfect detail. Earth hung there, blue and beautiful, completely unaware of what was happening light years away. "The Terra Containment Protocol is hereby enacted," Zethkalar announced. "Your system will be quarantined until your species learns proper behavior. An energy barrier will be constructed around your star system. Nothing will enter or leave." The chamber erupted in what Elena assumed was alien applause. Species after species voiced their approval of the decision. Only a few remained silent, and Elena noticed these were all from the outermost rings of the chamber. "You cannot do this," Captain Chen said, his voice rising despite his training. "We have done nothing wrong. We have committed no crimes. We have harmed no one." "You have done something far worse than wrong," Zethkalar replied coldly. "You have done something dangerous. You have given others hope for change. You have shown them that the natural order can be questioned. This cannot be allowed to continue." Elena felt her world collapsing around her as the implications became clear. "How long will this quarantine last?" "Until you learn your place in the cosmic order," the Supreme Coordinator answered. "Perhaps 1,000 years, perhaps 5,000. When your species has forgotten these dangerous ideas about equality and self-determination, when you accept the roles we assign you, then you may be allowed to rejoin galactic society under proper supervision." "And if we refuse?" Captain Chen asked, though he already suspected the answer. Zethkalar's shifting skin displayed what might have been amusement. "Then you will remain in your little system until your son dies. The choice, as you humans say, is yours." As they were escorted back to their ship under heavy guard, Elena caught sight of one of the delegates from the outermost ring. The being looked almost human, but with pale blue skin and enormous sad eyes. For just a moment their gazes met, and Elena saw something there that chilled her to the bone. It was pity mixed with a desperate kind of hope. The creature mouthed words that Elena's translator couldn't process, but she read the alien's lips carefully. The message was simple and terrifying. "You are not the first, but you may be the last chance." Their ship raced back toward Earth, carrying news that would change everything. Captain Chen sent encrypted messages ahead, warning Earth's governments to prepare for the worst. Elena spent the journey analyzing every interaction they had witnessed, trying to understand the true nature of what they had discovered. As they approached the edge of their solar system, they saw it beginning to form. A shimmering wall of energy was growing around the entire system, sealing them off from the galaxy beyond. The quarantine barrier hummed with power that made their ship's instruments go haywire. Within hours of their arrival on Earth, emergency sessions were called in every major government. The news spread quickly despite attempts at secrecy. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, but they were now prisoners in their own solar system, trapped by beings who saw their very nature as a threat to cosmic order. But the Galactic Council had made their first crucial mistake. They assumed that isolation would break human spirit, that being cut off from galactic civilization would make humanity desperate to conform to their rules. They had studied dozens of other species who had eventually submitted after periods of quarantine. They had never encountered a species like humanity before. In research facilities around Earth, scientists began analyzing every scrap of alien technology they had collected. Military leaders started planning for possibilities that had once seemed like science fiction. And in universities and laboratories, the greatest minds of the human race began to ask a simple question that would change everything. What if we could turn this prison into a laboratory? The Galactic Council believed they had contained a threat. They had no idea they had created one. The isolation they intended as punishment was about to become humanity's greatest advantage. For while they waited in their cosmic prison, humans began to do what they had always done best: adapt, improve, and prepare to prove that some species should never be underestimated. The quarantine was meant to last millennia. It would barely last a decade. The Awakening. 7 years had passed since the barrier went up around Earth's solar system, and Dr. Sarah Martinez wiped sweat from her forehead as she stepped back from her latest creation. The laboratory around her buzzed with activity as dozens of researchers worked on projects that would have been impossible before the quarantine. Strange as it seemed, being cut off from the galaxy had been the catalyst for humanity's greatest technological revolution. Status report, she called out to her team working on what they called the Quantum Leap Project. The new fusion reactors are running at 300% efficiency compared to the original alien designs, shouted Dr. James Park from across the room. He held up a device the size of a coffee cup that glowed with contained starfire. And we've miniaturized them to fit in a briefcase. Sarah smiled grimly. Before the quarantine, humans had been content to use alien technology as it was designed. But isolation had forced them to truly understand how everything worked. And once they understood it, they inevitably found ways to make it better. The laboratory door slid open and Dr. Rachel Kim entered, looking exhausted but carrying an expression that made everyone stop what they were doing. As Earth's director of xenobiological studies, she had been analyzing the biological samples that the diplomatic team had secretly collected during their fateful mission to Celestial Station. "Sarah, I need to see you in my lab immediately," Rachel said quietly. "Bring James and anyone else you trust completely." The tone in her voice made Sarah's stomach clench. She had known Rachel since graduate school, and she had never heard her sound this shaken. 20 minutes later, a small group of Earth's leading scientists gathered in Rachel's secure laboratory. The room was lined with sophisticated analysis equipment and holographic displays showing complex genetic structures. "What I'm about to show you," Rachel began, "changes everything we thought we knew about the galaxy." She activated a three-dimensional display showing the genetic makeup of various alien species. To most people, it would have looked like abstract art made of glowing particles and connecting lines. "These are the genetic samples we collected 7 years ago," Rachel explained. "At first I thought there were errors in my analysis. The pattern seemed impossible, but I've checked and rechecked hundreds of times." She highlighted specific sections of the genetic codes with different colors. "Look at these sequences. They're identical across completely different species. A tree like Veltar and a gas cloud Etherian have the same genetic markers in their cognitive development pathways." Dr. Park leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his growing sense of dread. "That's impossible. Species that evolved on different worlds in different environments cannot have identical neural development patterns." "Exactly," Rachel said. "Because they didn't evolve these patterns naturally. They were added artificially." The room fell silent except for the hum of equipment. Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Are you saying the aliens have been genetically modified?" "All of them," Rachel confirmed. "Every single species in the Galactic Council has been altered in the same way. These modifications target specific brain regions responsible for creativity, independent thinking, and what we would call rebellious behavior. Those traits have been suppressed to almost nothing." James felt sick to his stomach. "They've been lobotomized. The entire galaxy has been lobotomized." "It gets worse," Rachel continued, pulling up another display. "The modifications include dependency genes. These species literally cannot survive without regular genetic treatments that only Council technology can provide. They're not just mentally controlled, they're biologically addicted to their own enslavement." Sarah stared at the evidence floating before her, trying to process the implications. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on the genetic drift patterns, at least 12,000 years, Rachel answered. "Maybe longer. We're looking at a systematic program of genetic slavery that has been running for longer than human civilization has existed." The weight of the discovery hit everyone at once. The Galactic Council wasn't just a government or even a tyranny, it was a cosmic farming operation that had been domesticating entire species for millennia, turning free-thinking beings into docile servants. "That's why they quarantined us," James said slowly. "We're unmodified. We still have our natural creativity, aggression, and independence. We're a virus in their system." Sarah stood up abruptly and began pacing. "No, we're not a virus. We're an antidote." She turned to face the group, her eyes bright with possibility. "Don't you see? They made a mistake. They gave us samples of their genetic modifications. They showed us exactly how their control system works." Rachel caught on first. "You want to create a cure. I want to create a weapon," Sarah corrected. "A weapon that can undo 12,000 years of genetic slavery." What followed was the most intensive research project in human history. Working in secret facilities around Earth and the lunar colonies, teams of geneticists, biochemists, and nanotechnology specialists began developing what they called the Liberation Protocol. The project required breakthrough after breakthrough. They had to understand alien genetics better than the aliens understood themselves. They had to create delivery systems that could work across dozens of different biologies. Most importantly, they had to do it all without the Council knowing what they were planning. Meanwhile, other teams were working on different aspects of what was becoming clear was humanity's preparation for war. The Quantum Leap project had produced ships that could phase through normal space, becoming effectively invisible. The Prometheus Initiative had weaponized human creativity, developing combat systems that adapted and evolved in real time. But perhaps the most important project was led by Dr. David Chen, Captain Marcus Chen's younger brother. David had been working on something he called the Whisper Network, a communication system that could penetrate the quarantine barrier using quantum entanglement principles. 2 years into the development phase, David achieved his first breakthrough. A message, barely a few words long, managed to reach beyond the barrier and make contact with one of the species that had remained silent during the council session. The response that came back changed everything. "We remember," the message said. "We have been waiting. The children of the blue world, when you are ready, others will stand with you." The message came from the Keth Mori, one of the species Elena had noticed in the outermost ring of the council chamber. Through painstaking communication over several months, David learned the truth about what they were facing. The Keth Mori had been free once, 12,000 years ago. They had been scientists, artists, philosophers. They had questioned the council's authority and had been among the first to undergo correction. But something had gone wrong with their modification process. Deep in their genetic code, fragments of their original nature remained dormant, passed down through generations like buried memories. There are others, the Keth Mori contact revealed. Species that remember fragments, species that dream of freedom. The Council believes their control is perfect, but perfection is an illusion. We have been waiting for someone to show us how to break free. The communication changed humanity's entire strategy. They weren't just preparing to escape their quarantine or defend themselves from Council forces. They were preparing to lead a galactic revolution that would free billions of enslaved minds. Sarah's Liberation Protocol evolved into something far more sophisticated. Instead of just reversing genetic modifications, it became a system that could awaken dormant genetic memories, restore suppressed creativity, and most importantly, break the biological dependency that kept species loyal to the Council. The breakthrough came in the form of what they called quantum genetic resonance. Using principles borrowed from their communication system, they could create a signal that would spread through quantum-entangled particles present in all living beings. The signal would carry the Liberation Protocol directly to the genetic level of every living creature in the galaxy simultaneously. But deploying such a system would require getting close to the galactic core, where the Council's quantum communication network originated. It would mean breaking out of their quarantine and fighting their way through the combined fleets of hundreds of worlds. As the 10th anniversary of their isolation approached, humanity faced a choice that would determine not just their own future, but the future of every thinking being in the galaxy. They could remain prisoners in their own solar system, or they could risk everything in an attempt to free a galaxy that had forgotten what freedom meant. The decision, when it came, was unanimous. Humanity had never been a species to accept cages, no matter how large or comfortable. The Galactic Council had intended their isolation to break human spirit. Instead, it had given humanity exactly what they needed: time to prepare, technology to master, and a cause worth fighting for. The galaxy was about to learn that some species become more dangerous when you corner them, not less. And humanity was preparing to teach the universe a lesson about the power of free will that it would never forget. The Great Liberation. 12 years after the quarantine began, the galaxy was experiencing something it hadn't felt in millennia. Fear. Not the controlled fear the Council used to maintain order, but raw, primal terror that spread through the ruling classes like wildfire. Admiral Rebecca Torres stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Prometheus, watching the massive Council armada assemble outside their solar system. Thousands of ships from hundreds of worlds, all preparing for what they believed would be the final solution to the human problem. What they didn't know was that humanity had been expecting them. "Admiral," called out Communications Officer Lisa Zhang, "we're receiving a transmission from Supreme Coordinator Zeth Kalar himself." "Put it through," Torres replied, though she already knew what the message would contain. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the towering form of the Nexaran leader. His color-shifting skin displayed patterns that Torres's cultural briefings had taught her indicated extreme agitation. "Humans of Earth," Zethkalar began, "your quarantine period has been a failure. Instead of learning humility and accepting your proper place in galactic society, you have somehow influenced dozens of species across the galaxy. Entire worlds are experiencing what we can only call a pandemic of disobedience." Torres suppressed a smile. The Liberation Protocol had been spreading through the quantum communication networks for 6 months now, carried by Dr. Chen's Whisper Network. Species across the galaxy were beginning to remember what they had been before the Council's genetic modifications, and the results were everything humanity had hoped for. "Therefore," Zethkalar continued, "the Council has authorized the use of the Genesis Protocol. Your solar system will be sterilized completely, and Earth will be rebuilt with a properly modified human population that understands cosmic order." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Torres looked around at her officers, seeing determination rather than fear in their faces. They had all known this day would come. "Dr. Martinez," Torres called to the ship's science officer, "status on the quantum resonance transmitters?" "All systems ready, Admiral," Sarah Martinez replied from her station. "The Liberation Protocol is loaded and ready for galactic deployment. We just need to get within range of the Council's primary communication hub." "And that," Torres said grimly, "means getting to the galactic core through the largest military force in known history." The battle plan humanity had developed was audacious beyond belief. Instead of trying to fight the massive Council fleet directly, they would use their technological advantages to slip past the main force and strike at the source of Council power, the Nexus Core, a massive facility at the center of the galaxy that controlled all quantum communications across known space. The human fleet consisted of only 200 ships, but each one represented technology that the Council couldn't even comprehend. The vessels could phase in and out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to target. Their weapons adapted to enemy defenses in real time, becoming more effective with each shot fired. Most importantly, they carried the hopes of billions of beings who had been enslaved for 12,000 years. "All ships, this is Admiral Torres," she broadcast to the human fleet. "Today we don't fight just for Earth. We fight for every species that has been robbed of their birthright of freedom. We fight for the galaxy itself." The battle began at the edge of the solar system. The Council fleet, confident in their overwhelming numbers, attacked in perfect formation. They had fought dozens of rebellious species over the millennia, and they knew how such battles ended, with total surrender or total annihilation. But they had never fought humanity. The human ships phased out of normal space just as the first Council weapons fired, causing the massive energy beams to pass harmlessly through empty void. Reappearing behind the enemy formations, the human vessels struck with precision that seemed impossible. Each shot disabled multiple enemy ships, using resonance frequencies that turned the aliens' own technology against them. Within minutes, the perfectly ordered Council formation had become chaos. Ships collided with their neighbors as their guidance systems failed. Weapons overloaded and exploded as human viruses spread through their computer networks. The most advanced military force in galactic history was being torn apart by 200 ships that fought like nothing they had ever encountered. But the real battle wasn't happening in space. Deep within the quantum communication networks that connected every world in the galaxy, the Liberation Protocol was spreading like wildfire. On world after world, beings who had lived their entire lives in docile servitude suddenly remembered what freedom felt like. On Veltar Prime, the silver-furred workers who had spent generations building monuments to their Nexaran overseers suddenly stopped working and began asking why they had never built anything for themselves. In the crystal cities of the Etherian Collective, beings of living gas who had been content to process data for the Council began creating art for the first time in 12,000 years. Across hundreds of worlds, the greatest uprising in galactic history was beginning, not with violence, but with simple questions that hadn't been asked in millennia. Why do we serve? And what if we chose our own path? Admiral Torres watched the tactical display as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. "Admiral," called out Dr. Chen from his communication station, "we're receiving messages from 87 different species. They're declaring independence from the Council and offering to help with our mission." The tide was turning, but the hardest part still lay ahead. The human fleet had to reach the Nexus core before the Council could activate their ultimate failsafe, a device that would send a quantum pulse across the galaxy, killing every being who showed signs of genetic liberation. The journey to the galactic core took 18 hours of constant fighting. The Council threw everything they had at the human fleet, pulling ships from across their empire to stop the small force that threatened their entire system of control. But humanity had learned something during their years of isolation that the Council had forgotten over their millennia of dominance. Desperation breeds innovation. Every time the Council adapted to human tactics, the humans evolved new strategies. When the aliens learned to predict their phasing technology, the humans developed temporal displacement. When they countered the adaptive weapons, humanity unveiled gravitational warfare that turned stars themselves into weapons. Finally, the Prometheus and the surviving human ships broke through the final defensive line around the Nexus core. The facility was a structure the size of a small moon, covered in quantum processors that managed the communications for 1 trillion beings across the galaxy. "Dr. Martinez," Admiral Torres called out, "how long do you need to upload the Liberation Protocol to their main system?" 12 minutes for a complete galactic deployment, Sarah replied, her fingers flying over her console. "But Admiral, the Council is activating their failsafe. They're preparing to broadcast a kill signal to every liberated being in the galaxy." Torres made the hardest decision of her life. "All remaining ships, defend the Prometheus at all costs. Our mission isn't just to free ourselves anymore. If we fail here, billions die." The final battle raged around the Nexus core as the Liberation Protocol spread deeper into the Council systems. Human ships fought with desperate fury, knowing that every second they bought meant freedom for countless beings across the galaxy. With 3 minutes left in the upload, the Council's kill signal began to activate. Across the galaxy, beings who had just begun to remember freedom felt agony as their modified genes tried to reassert control. With 1 minute remaining, Supreme Coordinator Zethkalar himself appeared on the bridge of the Prometheus via holographic projection. "You have doomed the galaxy to chaos," he raged, his skin flashing patterns of pure fury. 12,000 years of peace and order, destroyed by one arrogant species. "Peace built on slavery isn't peace," Admiral Torres replied calmly. "It's just a very quiet form of hell. Without the Council's guidance, these species will destroy themselves with warfare and competition. They need us to survive." "Maybe they will struggle," Torres admitted. "Maybe they'll make mistakes, but they'll be free to make their own choices, free to succeed or fail on their own terms. That's what freedom means." With 10 seconds remaining, Zethkalar made one final attempt to stop the liberation. He activated the core's self-destruct system, preparing to destroy the facility rather than let it fall to human control. With 0 seconds remaining, Dr. Sarah Martinez smiled and pressed the final key. The Liberation Protocol exploded outward from the Nexus core at the speed of quantum entanglement, reaching every corner of the galaxy simultaneously. Across 1 trillion worlds, beings who had lived their entire existence under genetic control suddenly felt their minds expand as suppressed thoughts and emotions returned to them. The first thing they felt was anger. The second thing they felt was hope. The third thing they felt was the overwhelming desire to choose their own destiny. The Galactic Council, which had ruled for 12,000 years through fear and genetic manipulation, collapsed in a single day. Not through violence or conquest, but through the simple power of free will reasserting itself across the galaxy. Zethkalar, standing in the ruins of his command center as reports of rebellion poured in from every world in his empire, finally understood what humanity had taught the universe. Some things, once awakened, could never be put back to sleep. Freedom, it turned out, was the most contagious force in the universe. 6 months later, Admiral Torres stood in the same chamber where Dr. Elena Vasquez had first encountered the Galactic Council. But now, instead of a rigid hierarchy of controlled species, delegates from hundreds of worlds sat as equals, working together to build something the galaxy had never seen before. A truly free society. The quarantine barrier around Earth had been dismantled, not as punishment, but as celebration. Humanity had proven that some species, when cornered, don't become desperate. They become determined. And determination, the galaxy had learned, was humanity's greatest gift to the universe. The age of the Galactic Council was over. The age of galactic freedom had begun, and at its heart stood a small blue world whose people had refused to accept that freedom was something that could be taken away.